Hey everyone, welcome to our Prepare for Impact series. I'm Jody O'Brien. If you have not joined us on our previous episodes, please check out the Greater Boston's YouTube station as well as the page that you have been registering for these sessions. And all of our sessions have been recorded. So you can go back, you can watch them again, you can watch them for the first time, and you can go through the process. You're going to hear me make some references to some of the previous things we've talked about. So if you haven't seen those, you may want to go back. I also want to remind everyone to please make sure they're checking in with Greater Boston, Mass Association of Realtors, and the National Association's COVID-19 pages. All three of those tiers have special COVID-19 pages. So we're getting from local to state to national information, which is really important, and trying to filter down and process that information. And that is not only vital things for you as broker owners, managers, or team leaders, but really important for your agents as well. So please make sure you're checking with those things. And before you ask or comment, yes, I'm back in my office finally. It's as finished can be under these circumstances, still missing a few final touches that I'll need to venture out into the world once it's open to get them up and going. But I am thrilled to be back here and have a better setup for these webinars. So I am thrilled to be here. So let me just move my camera out of the way here. And let's talk about today, our process today. We're going to be going through in this next hour, the process of implementing change. So before we get too much farther in, I want to draw everyone's attention to the handout section. If you have, again, not been on here or not necessarily paid attention to this, then please make sure you do so now. So again, depending upon what type of device you are actually logged on to, you should have a toolbar. It's usually at the bottom of your screen. You'll see some icons. The question mark is how you chat with me. There's also, everyone, on there a handout section. It looks like a little icon of a sheaf of papers. And if you go on there, there is one thing in the handout today and actually one thing missing, but the one thing that's in there is really important. And that is a document that is the process that we're going to be talking about. And it's a fill-in document for you to utilize. So I highly recommend that everyone go on and download that document. What is not there is the actual presentation, which is kind of following along. Unfortunately, everyone, I had some issues uploading the presentation. I tried just about everything I could to get it uploaded, and I wasn't able to do that. So I'm going to have to get someone with higher tech knowledge than I am to rectify the issue of what's going on with it and get it uploaded. So if after the end of the program, you really want to see the handout along with the process that you have in the handout section, just shoot me an email, and I am glad once I get it figured out how to kind of get you along that presentation. It's unfortunately right now saving as a huge, mega huge file. For whatever reason, I don't know why it is doing that. It's bigger than the actual PowerPoint as it saves. So I couldn't even email it to you right now, but I'm sure I can rectify it sooner. I actually had the problem once before. I think it has to do with the template, and someone helped me out. I just don't know how they helped me out, so I'll have to reach back out to them. So if you want the presentation, again, just shoot me an email. But the process, the really important part, is in the handout. It's a PDF. Please click on it, download it. And again, if you don't see your toolbar down at the bottom, it's probably because of the device or how you're holding it. So check the side or the top. You should see your toolbar and be able to download that information. So, and again, I'm going to tell you, everyone, that this is a process that came to me many years ago when we were working with an outside consultant as we were developing a particular item of change. And we kind of fine-tuned and tweaked this, and I've used this in my own business over and over and over again. And I think it is a tool that you will find helpful as well in your brokerage, in your office, and your managers and your teams over and over and over again. But it is going to be particularly important, as we say. And I actually found this quote the other day, and I thought it was really very important for us to remember is the fact is that change is a destructive streak, and it can rip the heart out of an organization and it can kill the spirit. And I have seen that, everyone. I have seen when change was implemented, particularly incorrectly and out of choice, what it can do to your organization, to your office, to your company, to your team. And right now, there's a great deal of change that's going on right now and will be going on in the upcoming months, maybe even years, that we don't really have a lot of control over. Change is happening. We are in, again, I made mention that I hate saying this word, but I don't know how to replace it, the new normal, right? We will see change create a very different environment. We went into this at the precipice of what was looking like it was going to be a really huge spring market for us. We're going to come out in a very different place, right? So change is going to come through your organization, whether you want it to or not. That said, I also think change will and must come through your office, your company, your team in some very critical elements that you would talk about. So as we talked about in our 5 truths session, we talked about taking responsibility for where we are, making sure we made choices and acting on those choices. That process is going to develop change. You're going to have come out of that with some change that you're going to want to make in your office, your company, your team. So we're going to look at what are those things and how do you implement those change. So step number 1, right at the top of the process is why, right? Now, it actually could seem obvious to everyone why, because we have to, or why, because it just happened to us, or why. Those aren't really great explanations or great choices from that. And by the way, you'll always want to look at what are really the key issues and what are some of those aspects that you're looking at. So why up front will probably be out of necessity, all right? So you may have gone into this with potentially not the financial soundness that you thought you would be. And again, let's go back. Remember, we're not using blame. Remember that from our 5 truths. We're just taking responsibility, no blame. But here you were made a little stretch and you thought, well, I'll be able to make that up and more in the spring market. And you made a little stretch, and that financial necessity is going to implement some changes that you're going to have to make. And again, we'll use examples from really large examples like closing offices or laying off or furloughing employees or staff that comes along, to maybe even some small changes that may come along, such as combining some offices or changing some commission plans in the future. So necessity is going to create some of the reasons why. Here's one that I think we really should be looking for. And when we talked about the 5 truths, we talked about looking in the future or out. And I think that that's something that is very difficult when you're in a situation like we are in right now, when we're in the throes of something that's so immediate for us that it's hard to look at longevity. I will tell you this. in my experience, and I've gone through a lot of changes with companies over the years, the changes that are the most successful and adopted the best by the organization are the changes that are for the longevity, that are forward thinking, that are out through the process. I think I made mention on a call, one of our sessions before, of being involved in a switch of agency relationships in the company I was working for before the requirement to do so. As a matter of fact, we were 18 months ahead of the what ended up to be the actual requirement date in the planning stage, and nearly 9 months ahead of the adoption in the implementation stage. We were a really long way out. And it was no doubt that we needed this process, and we used this process, everyone, in making that change. But boy, did it get a huge adoption. Did it have a huge success when everyone in my company understood that everyone else was scrambling at the last minute because they weren't thinking forward to making this. And this was what's like, all of a sudden, all of the naysayers went like this. You know, like, we're the best. We thought of this ahead. So one of the things I'm going to suggest to you, one of the key issues and why you're doing this, should be looking forward for the longevity, for the ultimate success. And I know that makes it a little harder, but in the long run, it becomes substantially more successful. Obviously, one of the huge reasons of why is probably going to be financial. Now, let me just say, I'm not just talking about the negative here, right? Because there are some people who are in really great financial positions that may be going to use that to their advantage. And, you know, that old Warren Buffett saying of, you know, when the times get tough and everyone rushes out of the market, he's talking about the stock market in this case, when you should rush in. Well, we're going to see that. We've always seen that in down markets with the real estate industry. So we're going to see, and some of you may be right now thinking, wow, are there opportunities for me? Well, let me just share with you that those financial situations are going to drive why the changes. So, for example, an acquisition or a merger, right? How is that going to work? Is that change? Yes, everyone, right? Having been through more mergers and acquisitions in my career than I care to really ever participate in, it is a change. Whether you're on the negative side of that or the positive side of that, or which side you try to spin it, whichever side you're on, there is some definitive changes on that. So your positive financial position may also be a key issue in developing some changes that you want to initiate. And I also want to address the issue of trends, right? I think we're going to see some dramatic changes in trends. And we talked about this as well on one of our previous episodes, that these trends actually aren't new, all right? They have been being talked about and being predicted for a while. We just were inching, even microscopically moving towards these goals, these trends. And now we're going to go from 0 to 60 in this short period of time. We're going to see some trends. And you know, one of the ones that I have been throwing about as one of the trend changes that I think we might see is the reduction of bricks and mortar in our industry. You know, you have an entire population right now, everyone, figuring out how to work virtually. And frankly, although they might not really be comfortable being stuck in, they may be very comfortable with not working in the classic bricks and mortar environment that we have seen. So, and by the way, they're now forced to figure out how to use the tools to go through that. And this isn't just our real estate industry, this is our affiliate industry as well, trying to figure out how to do closings and transactions and appraisals, and I mean, everything on this virtual level that we're seeing. So you're probably going to be seeing those changes, and those changes may be something that you're now thinking about implementing. By the way, some of these things can go hand in hand. Financials could be driving trends, or necessity could be driving trends, et cetera. Or the trend could be looking out in the long term of longevity. So you have decided to make some changes. That's the process of where they are. Why are you making these changes? And by the way, the why is going to become critical, everyone. So don't skip over this and just say, oh, it's necessity. Oh, it's obvious, Jody. Well, you know, it's not going to be obvious to someone, right? And by the way, one of the fabulous parts of this technique is if you have someone in your organization or in your life that you really trust who's a questioner, right? Who can literally look at that and say, why are you doing this? What, you know, ask those questions. That is someone you should be running this process through, because if you try to skip over this step and they ask you why and you can't answer that question, you're going to see how it all falls apart from then on. So why are you doing this? What are the key issues? What's driving this through the force? And here's some of the other rationale that you want to know with the why, because the why translates the need to a cause. You'll notice I put that all in capital letters, because the cause, right, is something your people can rally around. And right now, everyone, you are seeing the result of that. Imagine, I don't even think we could, but imagine if 6 months ago, a year ago, a decade ago, we said to the entire world, stay at home. What? I don't even know how you could have implemented something like that. But right now we have a cause, and you have seen us really focus or laser focus some of those causes down. Keep a healthcare person safe. The healthcare worker is sacrificing, you know, exposure, so stay home from them. The greatest generation went to war for us. We can stay home from, those are the causes that people can rally around behind the why. So the why allows you to transfer that into a cause and what exactly you're using. And people can commit to a cause. And that's why they are doing this process. That's why you are making that change. And commitment, most importantly, equals action. And that's not only important for the people that you're trying to get to buy into this change, it's also really important for you. Because if you just sit on the why part of it, it's just kind of that dream. If you want to make it your goal, you've heard this saying before, what's the difference between a dream and a goal? A goal has action to it, right? So that commitment to this creates the action for the process. So the first step is, and you'll see it in that handout, everyone, if you've downloaded that, you're taking a look at it, but the first step is, why are you making this? What are the critical items? What are the key issues? And how do you translate that into a cause? I want to break this down now into looking into some really short-term and some long-term aspects from it. So on the short term, I want to know who will be negatively impacted. So I used the example earlier of laying off staff. Obviously, the staff person would be negatively impacted, but let's say the staff person was marketing, and they're producing marketing pieces for individual agents, ranking in the order of who uses them. Those would be the people that would be negatively impacted by that. So understanding who will be negatively impacted. Secondly, and this is important, everyone, right? Is the impact real or perceived? And we're going to dive a little deeper in this in just a minute, but this is really important for you, because the lack of control over these changes, and let's face facts, we all have that as an aspect certainly everyone is talking about this, our lack of control over this mystery. We even hear our medical profession, making claims to this as being part of their issue, is they don't understand it, they can't grasp it, they can't analyze it correctly. That's control, everyone. Lack of control leads to people acting as if they're victims, right? And victim acting is becomes a perceived negatively impact, not a real. So again, marketing, I lay off my marketing person, negative impact to my marketing person. The marketing person does the most amount of work for Bob and Mary and the least amount of work for Sue. Bob and Mary are realistically impacted by that. Sue, not so much, she doesn't do anything. But Sue is friendly with the marketing person that got laid off, and Sue now says, this is going to affect my business, it's going to affect how we do things, we're going to drop in our market share. Yeah, right? Sue is not realistically negatively impacted. She's playing on that lack of control, that she couldn't control the outcome for a friend of hers, and she couldn't control the outcome for herself. So she's acting like a victim. So this is really important, everyone. You want to identify both, because you're going to find, as I said, we're going to dive a little deeper into it, and you're going to need to understand both. So don't discount the real or the perceived. You need to make sure you analyze that and go through the whole thing. How do you know if it's real or perceived? It's because of how will they be impacted, right? So again, Bob and Susie have X amount of hours of work that the marketing person picks up. They use that in X amount of production. That's the actual how. Those are numbers. And those would not compare with Susie's numbers, who had a different, a perceived impact as opposed to real. So how are they impacted will help you develop. Oops, sorry, went the wrong direction there. And then I want you to take a look at the long-term impact. So the long-term impact, change often kills belief in the future. Yeah, let that one kind of sink in. Change often kills people's belief in the future. We're going down. That's it. We're going down. Look, they laid off the marketing person. That's it. We're not going to make it. I should start looking for another company, another office, another aspect. By the way, the other company, the other office, the other team probably isn't in any different position than you are, right? They just might be handling this change and have a different belief structure by those people that are impacted by the change. So it's really important to understand this really negative impact that change can have on, and how it can play out sort of long term. So here you are, you're financially really sound enough. If you just make these few cuts in your staffing, you're going to figure out how to handle it to the realistic people that are coming through, yet the belief structure of your organization starts to deteriorate. And hang on one second, I got some, oh, sorry, I keep hitting that. I'm going through, I got a question. Ooh, so on the short-term side, how long do I mean? And sort of on the long-term side, how long do I mean? Well, let me just say to you, on the short-term side, I don't think I mean any longer than 2020, all right? Ultimately, on the short-term side, we usually like to go out only about 3 months on this process, but I don't know if I can say that right now, that's the difference from short-term. As we certainly are currently hearing right now in the news, is they're arguing the medical versus the economic aspect of how long we're in this sort of, I mean, it's like a holding pattern almost. I know that we can still be doing business, and there is some business going on from that, but frankly, I don't know that we're seeing really a lot of business going on. So I feel like we're all in this holding pattern from that. So I think it's really important that we probably extend this short-term period till after the after we kind of go back into whatever our world is going to look like afterwards. So I don't know how long that's going to be, but I think I could make my short term even as long as 2020. All right. Which is, I mean, being in April, that's seems like a long time for a short term period. Long term is really that it's a year out, it's 5 years out, it's 10 years. It's kind of like your long term goal setting. It's really that real longevity for your team, your office, or your company from that process. So long term is really a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, as we typically do. So great question. Thanks for asking that. So long term, again, who'll be negatively impacted? We also said, will there be real or perceived? All right. Now remember, the farther out I go, the more likely the perceived impact, that acting like a victim because I'm really feeling out of control, because long-term often comes into aspects of sort of trends or that type of thing as you go through that process, and really changes from that. So how they'll be impacted is really important as you go through that that analysis of the aspect. So we're going to take how, right? So we've made a decision, we made an item of change, we said why we're making the change, the key aspects of it. We're looking at who's impacted by that, short term, long term, what's their negative impact, is it real or perceived, or et cetera. Now we're going to really look into the consequences of that state. I just want to state, and I guess I didn't really state this to start off with here. So I'll go back to, I'm going to lay off. I'm going to have staff layoffs, including the marketing department. I'll just use that as my example. All right. Because it's one that translates potentially to office, company, or team. You could all have certain staff, that you could all be making this decision. So I'm going to have staff layoffs from that. I want to say, here's the change I want to make. I want to have layoffs. I want to actually go through this entire process, start to finish, all right? The entire process before I make the change. All right. So this isn't, I'm not dealing with the consequences as they arise. I'm not dealing with the real or perceived negatively impact as it arises. I'm going through this all before I've even A, made the decision, all right, and then B, implemented. And that is a critical point for you to kind of look through this. Is this tough? Yes. And that's why having that person that you trust, or, that can ask you those questions to go through. By the way, they don't necessarily have to be within our real estate industry. It could be a friend in another business. Sometimes ask some really great questions because they don't understand. So they ask why, right? And that's what we say, because we've always done it this way, which y'all know is never a good explanation. And it could be a spouse, it could be a partner, it could be a significant other, it could be a friend, it could be a mentor, it could be in your mastermind group. We talked about that the other day. Having peers that we can run things by. So again, I'm going through all of these things. So again, I really want to make sure everyone understands that as we talk about these things, these aren't how you deal with them when they happen. These are how you process it ahead of time, so you know how you're going to deal with it when it happens. All right. And you all know what happens when you plan, it doesn't happen. So I don't know about you right now, but as I said this earlier when Sandy was on, I said, I have every remote charger, all right, in my house right now, currently charging. This one's already done, everyone. This is my big one that was already done that I travel with. I have every device plugged in and charging right now. So I'm planning, because the consequences are with the storm coming up, if I lose electricity on my devices, and as I said to Sandy, it's not like I can go out and, find out what's going on by going out, to somewhere else where they might have power, because I can't do that right now. So I'm planning. So right now, I know if the consequences are that the power goes out, I have the plan. I can plug in my devices as they run low on power. And we all know what happens. When you're prepared, those things don't happen. Right? I don't know. Is that like the reverse of Murphy's Law? Right? Is there a reverse? Maybe we should call it Jody's or O'Brien's Law. When you're prepared, things don't happen. And I really think what happens is that there are small steps leading up to these things that when you're prepared, you kind of you deal with the small steps so the big consequence never happens. And I think that's why it's happened. You guys said I could name it O'Brien's Law. Thank you. I'll have to publish that, right? Get the copyrights for O'Brien's Law. All right. What happens if you don't act now? What are the consequences? And I have to tell you, everyone, here's a great thing for consequences. I learned from a good friend of mine who's a national speaker that a really useful tool is to collect some of your own photography to be able to use in your presentation from that. So being prepared for that. And sometimes when I take these things, I have no idea what I'm going to use it from. So this is from my trip in September. I spoke at the Virginia Association of Realtors Conference, which was in Williamsburg. So some of you may recognize this is the governor's palace, the governor's house, whatever they call it, in Williamsburg. And actually, there was probably a series of 4 or 5 as I walked down the green and took a shot. What was I going to do? I had no idea what I was going to do with this. But I was looking for an example of what's short and long, a visual of short and long term. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this, right? Here I am basically looking out at this long term, this longevity. Remember, that might have been the reason to extend some trend aspect. And I've decided that I need to look at who's impacted, Bob and Susan and Mary, from this. Well, you know what? The grass is pretty green. The sky is pretty. I can see some clouds. I can see some definitive aspect, but I really can't see the palace. I can't see the end of the road here, the end of the green from that aspect. But if I don't act now, will I ever get up this close to the palace, right? If I don't start to act through this process. So what happens? What are the consequences if you don't act now? I'll go back to the example I used of the agency change. Well, one of the long-term consequences that we were pretty darn sure of is that this was going to be a legislative change here affecting our company, right? This was going to be a legislative change that was coming down the pike. Why were we pretty darn sure? Because we were out there, everyone, being involved in our realtor organization, and we had people, including myself, actually sitting on the committee. We knew what the plan of action was in the bigger picture of things. And, I don't have to tell any of you who've sat in my programs or classes before, I'm a big believer in being involved in our industry, because being involved in our industry, really one of the great things it does is gives you the long-term aspect of what some of these things are coming out. So we knew the issue is that if we didn't deal with it now, right, the long-term impact would be, it would be legislatively required of us, right? And within a relatively short period of time, and I want to say it was actually less than 6 months. It's been so long, it was 2005. Everyone, I can't really remember, but I want to say it was less than 6 months between the enactment of it and when it was required, when the changes were required of us. All right. So we knew that was. The short-term effect was we were ahead of the crowd. There was not the same why behind it, right? So it had some short-term consequences. If people we're not prepared if people had some negative impacts that we couldn't handle, real or perceived, we could lose agents, et cetera. So what are the consequences if you don't act now, right? If you don't act now, if you don't have the monies to pay for your marketing person, you don't have the income coming in to pay for the marketing person, you don't file for any of our, SBA loans to pay for the marketing, our PPP loan, right? And you probably have all heard of our payroll protection plan, or my favorite is how NAR is describing it as patience, persistence, and I forgot what the other P was, but it was a great example of going through this process. If you don't dive into that right now, what's the long-term effect? The long-term effect is that you don't have money for more things than just paying for the marketing person. You don't have money to pay the rent, the electric bill, the aspect, etc. All right. So what are the consequences if you don't look down the road and say, wow, there's my destination, the governor's passed, and you don't continue down that road so you can really see it? What's the impact of those things going through? So, and by the way, don't forget, I know a couple of you are interacting with me and I appreciate that, but please remember everyone, that question mark again down at your toolbar allows you to kind of chat over the questions. A little bubble pops up, and those are when I can see the questions going through from them. Okay, so the gist of the question is, what do I see as some of the impact in driving some of those changes going on? And I paraphrased it. I know you guys don't mind it usually if I do that from them. So I don't have a crystal ball, right? I don't know that I'm any more prepared to answer a question on a situation or dive into the impact on a situation we've never seen before, right? So if we had some type of financial aspect to it, I've seen that a couple of times in my career, right? I've seen the fall of the savings and loan. I've seen the subprime meltdown, right? I've seen the mortgage industry be driven in a downward direction by financial economic aspects and its effect on the real estate industry. I've seen some positive impacts as well. So we had a series of disastrous effects back in 2001. We had hurricanes, Rita and Katrina, and 9/11, and we saw those outside aspects, and we actually saw the real estate industry thrive in what was then decided as a global recession from some of those aspects. So I have some experience, so do you, in how we've dealt with some of those things. I don't know what we're going to deal with a pandemic, right? I'm not positive. I wouldn't necessarily say what the long-term aspect is, but one of the things I do know are some basics or fundamentals from how things will play out or develop. So I know that real estate operates on supply and demand, right? So I know that the effects of supply and demand affect the pricing of property, right? I know that my bottom line as a real estate broker is affected not only by volume, but by price range, right? How many houses I sell, how expensive those houses are to sell. So there's some fundamentals that I can look for, and those numbers play out every single day, every single week, every single month. And from day one, I have said it in this series, I have said it on day one of my agent-based series, and I know some of you are following both, and you have agents that are following the agent-based series. And I've said it in my my group, my podcast group. In other words, I've said it over and over and over again. You need to follow the numbers. Following the numbers are going to help you make really some of these bigger, harder decisions. So it's the fundamentals or the basics. And I think those are something we've always been able to rely on. and making those decisions. How is this going to play out? I don't know. Your guess is potentially as good as mine, but I think that's a really great question to continue to ask yourself is, how is this going to play out? And again, making those decisions based on that. And again, some of you will make them decisions, implement some of these changes based on some of those other key items or initiatives that we have. So great question. Kind of leads me actually into this aspect of it. What are the alternatives? And let me share with you from years of experience of being someone who has been part of implementing change, right? And you're going to see coming up some of the places where I have been very closely related to the implementation of change. The very first question will be asked, why didn't you do this? Did you think about this? The alternatives will be the first out of people's mouths. So what are the alternatives, right? What are the alternatives? Because I need you to be prepared and have that. So we just went through the entire process of why you're making this change, who's impacted by this change, how do you implement, what are the consequences? Now I want you to ask, what else could I or can I do? What else, right? This is where you get out that brainstorming, everyone. I don't care how absurd it is, right? I don't care if it is ask the marketing person to work for free, or ask them to take a pay cut, or go to an investor and ask for money to pay them. I don't care what it comes up with. I need you to brainstorm in what else you could do, right? Now, this possibly could lead you back to step one of making a different decision, or it could just confirm why you are making the change or the decision you want. Why not, right? Why not? So when you say what else and you just, then why aren't you doing those things? Why not, right? Or did they lead you back to the beginning? Don't forget, the alternative of what you originally started the path down now becomes the alternative of the new change, right? Does it have to be now, or can it be later? What are the alternatives for that? So again, maybe my ultimate decision is a combination, right? Ask the marketing person to take a pay cut, and if I still don't have the financial position, then they're going to have to be laid off, right? My God, the scenario is getting worse and worse. But please remember, everyone, when we talked about these under the 5 truths, we talked about making choices, making decisions means not making the hard ones as well, right? So unfortunately, this may be some of the hard decisions that many of you are looking at, making the process or the procedure around of implementing that change. Next up, everyone, is what is every question that's going to come into play from this? And under questions, I want you to make these administrative, all right? So how will we do this? Who will do this? What form will I need to do this? What are all of the administrative, so if I lay off the marketing person, how will my brochures get done? How will my marketing, who will put in my advertisement? What time will my advertisement need to go in if someone else is doing it, right? What are the practical aspects of this? Again, what form do I need? Where is that form? How do I find that form quickly? Right? Those are the sort of down and dirty aspects of practical, and you're going to see how much of this is going to come into play in just a minute as well. What's the procedural aspect of it, right? How do I do it in that? What's the functional aspect of it? Who does it? When do you have to do it, etc. from there. So here's what you notice. These questions that you're answering are all the who, what, where, when, how. Yeah, you know these, right? You know these, absolutely. Who, what, where, when, how. But you'll notice that I am missing, go back, a missing why, right? Why is not the question. Why is an objection, right? Who, what, when, where, how are all the questions I need you to answer for this. Everything, everyone, every single person in your organization will ask, right? Everything. And what is the answer to that? But objections come into effect in the why. When we talked about the negative impact, the real negative impacts are the questions, right? The procedural, the functional, the administrative, those are the questions. The who, what, when, how. The perceived are the objections, and those are the whys. These are equally as important, everyone. Equally as important that you understand and you get through that, because common objections are fear-based, right? If you can't alleviate fear, and for most of you now, I don't really need to tell you this because this is how you've been operating for about the last 2 weeks, right? You've been calming the fear down of your company, above or below you, depending on where your position is, the agents out in the field, the buyer clients, the seller clients, particularly those in transactions, your affiliate members, mortgage, title, appraisal, etc. And then you've been dealing with the own fear with everyone in your personal life as well, right? I don't need to tell anybody, right, who is at least keeping their head above the water, which frankly is all we can say. And frankly, I don't even know if we're all keeping our head above, but as long as I got the water, I got my nose above the water, I'm still breathing, right? We know that you've been dealing with the fear of this. The second most common objection is actually not belonging. And so the gentleman that I quoted, let me just sneak over here out of camera just a second. Price Pritchard, everyone, wrote this wonderful book. It was literally still in my bookcase when I went looking through. I knew we had utilized it before. So it's called Firing Up Commitment During Organizational Change. It's a handbook for managers. I didn't look. You might be able to find it on Amazon. He's written a number of books out there. All right. So it's just a small one, but he dives a lot into the aspect of change creates some people feeling not belonging. When people don't feel they don't belong there. They don't feel wanted or needed or etc. They actually have two things that happens to them. One is they leave, all right, and they go to another resource, and that can have obviously a negative impact on you. But even if it doesn't have a negative, sometimes before they leave, or sometimes they stay and don't leave, they spread this aspect, right? So they become the sort of fear-mongering, not belonging, and they literally can change the mindset of the entire organization. They start with the people who feel like them. They move on to the people who are kind of neutral yet, who haven't decided whether they're for or against your change. And they can actually have enough impact to get to the people who really were quite committed to this. So understanding that this change can drive people's not belonging, and that those people either kind of need to move on or make sure they're committed. So that lower tier of people that are connected to the change can have some real significant impact to you. I thought this was also more important to us, and that is that people become busy but not productive, right? So they look to the minutia that they can control, and frankly, this is fairly rampant in our non-producing agents anyway, that they take a single transaction and they blow it into their entire life, right? So they spend all day trying to accomplish a task, where a top producing agent could have, I don't know, 20, 30, transactions juggling all at the same time, and they could get a resolution to that one issue in 5 minutes or 15 minutes or et cetera, because they're productive. We also know that there's those people that are just plain busy. Well, that can be an effect of someone who objects to it, is they they sort of hunker down, to use that term we used earlier, to hunker down into things they feel like they can control the minutia from that. We also can have a huge effect of survivor's guilt. So again, some of you are going to potentially either lose agents or employees, you're going to lay off or furlough, et cetera. Those who stay are people that you wanted to stay, but they actually then feel like people don't really matter to you, right? You need to explain why these decisions are hard, why they make a choice. And let me share with you, everyone, I've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, with this one. You've heard me say that, the job of turning the lights out is, one of the jobs that I've had before, and it's fairly, it has a huge ramification to you, right? It's a huge ramifications as you slowly go through sort of this downsizing aspect in this, or maybe mergers and acquisitions as well through this process. So again, that's a really common objection to this. Helplessness, yeah. We spend a lot of time talking about in the real estate industry how our business is full of independent contractors, you're captain of your own ship, you're CEO of your own organization, et cetera. Yet frankly, these people can feel out of control by the decisions that you're making, right? And they can feel helpless. So, some of these things where you might have more than one way to implement it or more than one way to handle it, maybe part of your plan is to go out and say, here's what's happened, here's the change we're going to make, and we could do this or that. What do you think is the best way to do it? And really let people become sort of captains of their destiny. Bob and Mary, you'll use the marketing person the most. So here's some of the options. Would you like to do this or would you rather do that? Right? What are two of the different choices that you can make? And then people feel again back in control and back like they're creating some of the aspects to what they happen. And then really, everyone, I know this is hard for us to believe, particularly since we're all going to be in the same boat, right? But I saw this in the early 90s when I was brand new in the real estate world. I saw it in the mid 2000s when I had many years of experience in all multiple layers of the real estate industry. But I saw when we saw global changes to the real estate industry, again, the subprime meltdown, the fall of the savings and loan, people sometimes acted like it was all you, right? It was you and only you who are making these changes, right? Why are you, right? Why are you doing this? When the fact of the matter is, we were all in the same boat. We were all seeing market drops. We're all seeing market shifts. We're all seeing downsizing, et cetera. People have a lack of trust. It just becomes a common objection. That's the process that change, particularly change that hasn't gone through this aspect. So what are their objections, right? Their perceived objection. Here's the basics or the foundations of which they come from. And here are some important aspects because frankly, they'll all relate back to self-preservation, right? That's when top producers walk out the door. That's, when a great employee that you were going to keep goes somewhere else to another position. We'll all make the best decision for ourselves, which may not be the best decision for the organization if you don't deal with that. And then kind of last but not least, as we went into this, you might have had the sort of most closely knit, fun, interactive, great team, all for one for all aspect. And this change loses that connection, right? And frankly, I've seen this connection or lack of connection all over. I have been on some office meetings. I've done some little mini sessions for some managers that I know, jumped in on their office meeting, which by the way, if anyone is interested, give me a shout out and I'm more than glad to go on and do a 15-minute or so presentation as you try to maintain these connections through this virtual world. It's really important. And I've seen others where I have said, agents have reached out, potentially asked me a question. I said, well, how are you getting questions fielded by your manager or company? Are you doing that on regular calls? Are you doing, they're like, I haven't heard. Every once in a while they email me. No, I never know whether to believe those things because they always tell me that they never hear from you anyway. Right. But if that's true, there's already a loss of connection on your part to theirs. Never mind what their part will eventually be through that process. All right. Which is that what's in it for me. I want to remind everybody this is a technique that one more, that I teach agents how to deal with objections, and I've been teaching them for years. Here's also where you need to understand when they come up with these objections. Again, remember we said they're perceived, they're based on things like feelings. You still need to handle these objections by acknowledging them. I understand many of our agents feel that way. I understand why you feel that way. Again, what is it that you're concerned about? How do we deal with it, etc. So what you're telling me is you're concerned about how, Mary will survive, or the marketing person, or etc., or how you'll do that. Answer that question, because now you've delved into the real, then confirm it, move on. Do not bypass these objections, right? Remember I said before, I want you to understand what these perceived. It's not because they're not going to count. We're going to have all the questions to answer, and we're going to have all the objections to answer as well. Questions, everyone, are answered in my favorite task, policies and procedures. So you know that some of you, even potentially on our call today, I've interacted with in writing policies and procedures. It's a passion of mine, is creating policies and procedures. And this is what's really important, everyone. You need to take these things into actual policies and procedures. And I believe they should be in writing. All right. So policy, everyone, is addressing the important or pertinent issues. Policy creates confidence. In other words, you really thought this out. It assists the decision-making process, right? Again, how people will or won't practice based on not having a marketing person, again, just using that as an example. It's action-oriented. What do they need to do? How do they go through that? And it identifies and avoids the consequences, right? Here's where you're getting down into the nuts and bolts. You may find that you missed a consequence, etc. Procedures are the answers to all the questions that you came up with earlier, all right? That's what leads to the clearly defined sequence of steps to be followed in a consistent manner, which is what a procedure is. Having procedures increase comfort levels. Now I know what to do, because before I gave it to the marketing person. Now I don't know what to do. It's all confusing, etc. By the way, for those of you who are a level above and you have staff below you, not only the marketing, but you may have managers or etc. Procedures create a consistency, which is so important, right? If one office or one group is doing something differently, that has a problem or an issue to it. And procedure shows you how to. Where's the form? How do I fill it out? What do I do? When does it happen? What are the processes to it as well? And here's my second aspect of why I have dealt with so many of these changes. So first was I've written a lot of policies and procedures, not just companies that I was employed with, but for many of you as well. As you went out to implement these things, I have helped you, assisted you in writing policies and procedures. But here's the second one. I always became the face of that change, and so does everyone else who stands up in front and trains to it. If you are going to implement change, a change people were comfortable with, everyone, you need to make them understand that policy and procedure. And training is key. It's fundamental. I have a couple of companies that I've done policies and procedures for, developed training programs that I have been consistently implementing over years after writing the policy and procedure. And in those years, I've seen something really interesting. I've seen some people come to those programs over and over and over again. Why? Because that's how long it takes them to understand that change that's important. And we've always welcomed them and made sure that they feel that they can continue to come in here and ask questions as their level of understanding increases or to increase that knowledge. So training creates that real line of communication, right? I used to joke that I was the most visible underling in a company that I worked for, right? So here I was a company trainer. I didn't have a management style position, etc. But more people knew me. And there's a story I've shared a couple of times in classes. You may have heard this before. When I was sitting at a company awards dinner, and the president of the company was speaking, and a agent sitting beside me tapped me on the shoulder, leaned over and whispered into my ear, and she said, "Who is that woman, and why do I care what she says?" Right? So here I am sitting there, I'm invited to sit at their table, and everyone knows me and we're interacting, and the president of the company is unknown. So the lines of communication were different. Training creates that line of communication, whether it's you, the president of the company, you, the office manager, you, the broker owner, or you have a training department working in there. They create the line of communication. They help alleviate that fear. They deal with the practical, right? Many times I brought issues back and said, we have a blank here that we've discovered because of it. They have much smaller groups to deal with. They create that connection back. Remember, I said that was a big thing. And they can develop new skills. We have a typo there, right? Which is really significant. And kind of last but not least, everybody, is, yeah, you need a deadline because you need to act, all right? You can't keep going through this process without actually putting it into play. And that is significantly important, everyone, that you understand that you need to act and you need to move. You need to have a deadline, right? What's the best outcome? What's the worst outcome? And can you live with the worst outcome? That's the issue. Again, everyone, I want to really thank you and appreciate. I'm going to leave the presentation open for just a minute, because if you haven't downloaded the handout, everyone, please do so. I think you will find this process really helpful, not just right now, but continuing. Keep it out there, everyone. I will eventually put it up on my website, everyone. I hadn't put it up there as a resource, but I think I will put it up there. So in the future, if you want to look for it, but download it now. If for whatever reason you're on a device, you can't get it downloaded, or you don't want to download it, shoot me an email. I'm more than glad to send it out to you as well in the PDF. If you really want a copy of the presentation, which is kind of just the repeat of the handout, I am glad once I get it converted to a reasonable size file to send it out to you. So please communicate with you. I want to thank you very much for sitting with me for 4 of the 5 parts of this presentation. I hope they were helpful. Again, I want to remind you they're all recorded. And I want to remind you on Friday, the 5th part is here, which is really that Know Your Numbers. RPR will be here, and they will be going through the process of all the broker tools that are on RPR, which is really important. I also want to remind you, if you have agents, that the agent series has also been recorded, and we have 2 more sessions coming up on the agent series starting tomorrow, Tuesday, and next Tuesday as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll put my information up there so you have all of that information, and I wish you the very best in dealing with all of these changes. Thanks, guys.